They saw a scarred man, a limping figure haunting the school gates like a ghost from a forgotten war. Whispers followed him, sharp as shrapnel, dismissing Staff Sergeant Chris Caldwell as a broken relic, his burn scars and prosthetic leg proof. A failure to some A teacher's careless words stung worst of all, mocking a hero's sacrifice as psychological baggage. As if courage could be graded like a pop quiz. But some stories refuse to stay buried. If you believe wounds don't weaken a warrior, but forge them in fire, then stick around for this tale of valor and redemption. Hit that subscribe button for Midnight Tales, because stories like this one burn bright and demand to be told. Maya Caldwell stood at the front of her 7th grade civics class, her hands trembling as she gripped the pages of her essay. My personal hero. Her voice was steady, though each word chosen with care to honor. A man who'd never speak of his own deeds. She described how her father, Chris, pulled 2 soldiers from a burning Humvee, shielding a third with his own body, as a second blast tore through the desert, painting the sky red. She spoke of what he lost most of the skin on his left side, the ability to run or kneel without pain, and the quiet years that followed, where he bore the weight of survival in silence. My dad isn't famous, Maya said, but he gave up pieces of himself so others could keep all of theirs. The classroom held its breath for a moment, a fragile pause broken by a few awkward claps. Then came the voice of Mr. Whitman, the civics teacher, his arms folded behind his desk, his tone sharp as chalk on a board. That's emotional, Maya, but trauma doesn't equal heroism. A few kids snorted, one muttered yikes, and Whitman's smirk cut deeper than his words. Next time, he added, pick someone who chose to serve, not someone who chose to get hurt. Maya's jaw clenched as she returned to her seat, her essay crumpled at the edges, her eyes blinking back tears. No one spoke up for her, not yet, but someone saw. Dean Reyes, the soft-spoken janitor who swept the hallways each night, wore an old army ring beneath his latex gloves. He overheard Whitman's words as he passed the classroom door, and though he said nothing then, a fire kindled in his chest. That night, he made a call to a man he'd saved in Fallujah, a man who owed his life to a sergeant with burn scars and a broken comms unit. Across the country, a network of old names sparked 2 life soldiers who hadn't worn uniforms in years, but carried a code etched in their bones. You don't mock the man who took the blast for you. Not ever. At dinner, Maya was quiet, shrugging off her father's questions about school, when Chris leaned his cane against the table and peeled off his jacket, revealing the faded marine patch sewn inside. She stared too long, then looked away. Later, in her room, she opened the shadow box she'd never dared touch since his injury. Inside lay a folded letter with a United States Central Command seal, a bronze star, and a melted dog tag. As she read the letter in silence, something shifted. She'd always known her father was brave, but now she saw the harder truth. Heroism isn't always wrapped in parades or salutes. For her dad, it lived in pain, in showing up every day despite the whispers, in standing outside her school each morning under a worn Marine Corps cap. Across 4 states, boots hit the floor, ribbons were brushed clean, and old call signs crackled to life. Men and women who owed Chris their lives heard what happened to Maya, and to them, it meant one thing. It was time to report, and not to a base, but to a classroom. The next day, Mr. Whitman's class carried on as if nothing had changed. Maya kept her eyes down, her voice softer, her notebook closed even during open assignments. When a kid bumped her in the hallway and sneered, "Careful, you might get a PTSD flashback like your dad," the laughter wasn't loud, but it echoed. Chris stood in the pickup line as always, leaning against his rusted Dodge. One boot scuffed, the prosthetic gleaming in the sun, his face unreadable beneath his cap's brim. He didn't ask why Maya clutched her backpack like armor, or why she said fine 3 times on the drive home without meaning it once. That night, after she went to bed, Chris walked to the garage, flicked on the dusty light, and opened an old ammo box. Inside, no weapons, just a sat phone and a list of numbers, on waterproof parchment, labeled in case needed. He dialed the first number, waded through the static, and spoke 3 words. They shamed her. The response was instant, not pity or shock, but a single sentence. I'll be there by Thursday. The signal spread. Texas, California, the Carolinas. Virginia boots were pulled from closets, pins polished, old Marine patches stitched onto denim, not for revenge, but because one of their own had been mocked for the wounds that saved their lives. At school, the whispers grew. A meme of Chris photoshopped onto a burn notice poster spread through phones until it reached Dean Reyes, who forwarded it to a private server he hadn't used since 2009. Whitman doubled down, telling Maya in front of her group, "You're emotionally manipulating your classmates. Heroism is about impact, not injury." She didn't speak, just recopied her father's letter by hand that night, word for word, like a sacred text. Meanwhile, Colonel Jacob Marks landed at a regional airport 2 towns over. A duffel bag and combat logs signed by the officer Whitman, called a broken vet in tow. Sergeant Tom Ruiz checked into the same motel, burned scars on his forearms. Still carrying the pocket knife Chris handed him before their convoy exploded. Others were already en route. Maya submitted a revised essay, attaching the general's letter as an appendix. Whitman glanced at it, muttering, "I suppose fantasy writing is still technically writing," and set it aside. He didn't know that 21 men and women from Rikon Delta were arriving at a motel blocks from the school. No ranks or ribbons, just scars and a storm in their eyes forged in fire, not broken by it. On Wednesday, the principal received an anonymous letter on military-grade parchment. This Friday, the lesson is ours. No threats, just a list of call signs, including Caldwell Shield. The secretary thought it a prank. The vice principal chuckled. But the school's resource officer, a former Army MP, went pale. He knew those names meant business. The platoon wasn't coming for confrontation, they were coming for correction. That night, Maya watched her father practice walking without his cane in the yard. Not to prove anything, but because he sensed a door was about to open. One requiring more than balance. Sweat dripped down his scarred face as he looked up at her window, nodded and whispered, "They're coming." And they remember. At the motel, the veterans reviewed the classroom layout, not a tactical op, but a mission of precision. They agreed, no uniforms, because their scars were their badges, their silence their formation. Maya was their rally point. They'd followed Caldwell into a firestorm once. On Friday, they'd follow him into a school. It began before the second period bell, as rain thinned to mist and clouds parted like curtains. The classroom air grew taut, hushing even the rowdiest students without explanation. The door creaked open. Not an interruption, but an arrival. One by one, 23 men and women entered, varied in age, posture, and gait, united by presence. No uniforms, just scars. A man with a steel leg and burned scalp. A woman with a limp and an eye patch. Another cradling a satchel like it held sacred relics. They lined the back row, then the walls, shoulder to shoulder. Whitman straightened, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry, this is a closed." His voice faltered as Chris Caldwell stepped in, steady despite his limp, his gaze unwavering. Every eye turned to Maya, frozen at her desk, fingers gripping her notebook. "What's going on?" Whitman demanded, louder now, grasping for control. Colonel Marks stepped forward, placing a folder on the desk. "This is the man you mocked, and these are the people who followed him." Whitman opened it, seeing citations, photos, a letter signed by a 4-star general, the most composed leader I've served under, and the reason I made it home, he stammered. But Marks turned to the class. "We're not here for punishment. We're here for clarity." One by one, the platoon spoke. "He pulled me from a fire," said a man with a cracked voice. "He gave up his airlift seat so I could see my daughter," whispered a woman. "He covered me during an ambush. My spine's intact because of him." Another. "He told me I mattered when my family didn't." The students sat frozen, some with tears, others squirming, all seeing Chris not as a shadow by the pickup line, but as the cornerstone of lives that wouldn't exist without him. Sergeant Ruiz handed Maya a rusted dog tag, fused by heat, barely legible. "He found this, used it to check my pulse under fire. That man was me." Maya's hands shook, but her back straightened. She looked at her father, then the platoon, and smiled, not from pride, but recognition. Whitman sat speechless. The principal, quietly at attention in the corner. Chris spoke one sentence. "I didn't come for me. I came because she thought being quiet meant being wrong." He placed a hand on Maya's shoulder and walked out, the platoon following, silent as smoke from a long-burned fire. A classmate's voice broke the hush. "Then another. Thank you, sir." The room rose, saluting with silence. Outside, students followed to the lot, watching the veterans embrace and disperse like wind. On Maya's desk, a note from Marks. "Legacy isn't loud. It stands even when mocked." The school's website later added a guest speaker section, the platoon that came for the girl. In her room, Maya placed the dog tag beside the general's letter, in her shadow box. The mocking stopped, but more importantly, the silence did too. When a platoon walks into a classroom, they don't teach history, they finish it. Subscribe to Midnight Tales for more stories that honor the unsung.